I made a calculation, and if I were to read everything that I ideally want to read before the end of the year, I'll need to read 3.5 books a day. Hey everyone, how are you doing? I'm planning out what I want to read in December before the end of the year, and I'm getting that sort of panicked feeling of like, oh, I don't have enough time to read all of these books. So I'm trying to go through and select the ones that I want to prioritize, and I'd really love to get your help. If you've read any of these books, let me know in the comments below if you think I should, put them on the top of the TBR pile, or if you've heard really good things about these books, or yeah, any feedback would be really appreciated. Because yeah, I don't know. I know it's really silly to get that sort of panicked feeling, because obviously I have as much time as I want to read all these books, but I just want to try to stay current and make sure I've read all the best books that I can before the end of the year. So I'm gonna go through and talk about some of the books that I want to prioritize and that look really tempting to me. I won't go into too much detail about any of them because I've already talked about a lot of these books, most of these books in haul videos throughout the year. So I'm just gonna highlight certain ones in different categories. So for instance, if we first look at some really good looking debut novels that have come out this year, there is The Incendiaries by Kwon. There's Arkady by Patrick Langley, which I think this is the first debut novel that Fitzcarraldo Editions have published. There's Orchid and the Wasp by Caoilinn Hughes. There's Asymmetry by Lisa Halliday, which is sort of controversial novel. There's She Would Be King by Wayetu, which I first heard about on Russell's booktube channel. Then there are some books of short stories like Shift by Mia Gallagher, an Irish writer. Things to Make and Break by May-Lan, a book that has been reprinted. Mothers by Chris Power. Night Train by Thom Jones. This is new and selected stories. Fish Soup by Margarita, Garcia, Robayo. There's some really interesting looking translated literature. So there's Trick by Domenico Starnone, and also his novel Ties, which came out I think last year or the year before and really highly acclaimed, and also were translated by Jhumpa Lahiri. And somebody told me just recently that Jhumpa Lahiri is now living in Italy apparently and has decided to only write her books in Italian, which is really fascinating and interesting. I knew nothing about that before. Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. And I'd tried reading her novel Flights earlier this year and just didn't really get on with it, but I would really like to try more of her fiction. Homeland by Walter Kempowski. This is a novel set in Berlin, and I just went to Berlin recently, so I'm really curious to read more fiction set in Berlin. There's The Years by Annie Ernaux. This is a memoir, actually, I think, but it's been really highly acclaimed. There's Farewell My Orange by Awaki Kai, and Acts of Infidelity by Lena Anderson. There's really good sounding nonfiction that I want to get to. So there's Educated by Tara Westover, which has been so highly acclaimed by everyone and is already, appearing in those best of books of the year lists that are coming out. There's Sharp by Michelle Dean. There's Writers as Readers, Virago Celebration. So these are essays by a bunch of really great writers on these great classic female authors. On Michael Jackson by Margot Jefferson. I just mentioned her memoir Negroland recently. That was so interesting. The Immeasurable World by William Atkins. This is a book all about the deserts of the world and some of the most remote places in the world. There have been some beautiful new editions of absolute classic books, so like Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, this 80th anniversary edition, which is so beautiful. There's 1,000 Acres by Jane Smiley, this beautiful Everyman's Library edition, and also an Everyman's Library edition of few Angela Carter books. There's Kingdom of Elves by Sylvia Townsend Warner, which I think was her first novel, and I read another Sylvia Townsend Warner book earlier this year, so I'm curious to read more because she's a very interesting writer. Child of Fortune by Yuko Tsushima. It's a Japanese writer who's been published in English for the first time. The Seventh Cross by Anne Segers, a novel about the rise of fascism, which sounds so fascinating, and I'd heard about this novel years before, but I've been just really wanting to get to it. And then there's some really fascinating sounding experimental literature, by which I mean novels that just sort of play with the form of fiction and how subject matter is conveyed. So there's Murmur by Will Eves, which was shortlisted for the Goldsmiths Prize recently. There's The Chameleon by Samuel Fisher, The Endless Summer by Madame Nielsen, and Now Louison by Jean Frémont, about the life of the artist Louise Bourgeois. And then there are books that every time I see them on my shelf, I'm like I need to get to that book next. But then I see a whole bunch of these books and, you know, I can't prioritize everything or put everything at the top of the TBR pile. So it's just, you know, that endless dilemma of a reader. So there's books like The Baghdad Clock by Sahad Al-Rawi. There's Charles Lambert's new novel called Prodigal, which I think is sort of family saga, and just I think he's such a fascinating writer. I really want to read this. There's Whistle in the Dark by Emma Healy, her follow-up novel to her great debut novel. America is Not the Heart by Elaine Castillo. Tangerine by Christine Mangan, a sort of thriller which sounds so good and really interesting and was blurbed by Joyce Carol Oates. Peter Carey's new novel, A Long Way Home. I just keep meaning to get this because I just think he's such a great writer. And George Saunders, this little novella, beautiful little novella called Fox 8, which just every time I see it is just, it's so beautiful, I want to get to it. And apparently it's not a new book, somebody pointed out in the haul video where I was talking about it, but a reprint, sort of, I think, cashing in on his Booker fame. So those are some select ones that I'm really interested in, but honestly, I'm so curious about a lot of these books and would really like to read them at some point. So I'll go through and show the entire pile so you can have a good nosy through and let me know which of these you think would be best for me to start with and to prioritize. And I know it is sort of funny and odd to have this reader's guilt that we need to try to read everything before the end of the year, or at least I feel that way. I don't know if anybody else does, but yeah, I think it's just this sense of wanting to feel like I'm on top of what's currently being published and making sure, and you know, and that's sort of because of these best books of the year lists that are coming out. And if I've only read one or two of the books on these lists, then I feel like, oh, maybe I'm not a great reader, which I know is ridiculous because obviously I read all the time, and by the average person's standards, I read a lot more than most people do. Although I think not, I just sort of like average them out by the standards of BookTube of how much, because there's such ardent readers on BookTube that we're all just reading all the time. And I know everyone asks me all the time, like, how do you read so much? I think that's the question that I'm asked so often, but I never really know how to answer that question. But yeah, I just sort of read what I can, but I still, you know, feel like I want to read the best that's out there. And I know with, like, especially it feels like going into December and sort of the festive season, I want to be sure that I'm reading really great books and books that I know are going to be quality, and books that, yeah, I just that are partly like a pleasure too. Like I want it to be an enjoyable read and one that I can really get into, rather than one that I feel like I'm just, well, this sort of sounds interesting, but I don't know how it's going to pan out. And obviously you never know how books are going to pan out, but yeah, I just sort of want to try to beat the odds and make sure that it's really quality, interesting books that I'm reading over December. So that's my rambling sort of explanation of why I have this panicked feeling to read as much as possible before the end of the year. So if you could let me know in the comments below what you think I should put on the top of the TBR pile, I would appreciate it. Let me know what you're reading in December as well. And I don't need any more suggestions, I guess, with all these books I have. But yeah, I'm curious to know if there's any books that I've missed out on, or if you think that I should get to in particular. That would be great. But I hope you're doing well, and I hope you're gearing up well for the festive season and reading lots of good things, and I'll speak to you again soon. Thanks for watching, everyone. Bye.